Welcome to Door County, Wisconsin.
Located in the northeastern part of the Badger State, Door County is a charming and picturesque destination, known for its natural beauty and quaint coastal communities. Bordered by Lake Michigan to the east and Green Bay to the west, the county boasts stunning waterfront views, pristine beaches, and vibrant fall foliage that draws visitors year-round.
With its lavender, lighthouses, kayaking, and fishing, Door County offers a serene escape for nature enthusiasts, families, and couples seeking a tranquil retreat in the heart of the Midwest. All that would change in 2019 when a string of gruesome murders shocked the quaint coastal county.
This is the story of the Door County Key Killer, an unsolved string of serial killings claiming the lives of 7 residents and terrifying hundreds more.
So, we invite you to join us as we take a look into these crimes, the people involved, and the theories as to who may have been behind the whole affair.
Dearest listeners,
welcome to Locked Door County. Welcome to the last episode of Locked Door County.
Theories.
This week, we're excited to look back on this season
and take a closer look at the many theories in the case.
And a few suggested by you, the listeners.
But before we can get into that, let's take a walk down the case and recap everything that went down.
Altogether, there were 7 murders, 2 missing persons, and 2 suicides.
Dr. Philip Hayes was killed in his office from blunt force from a canister of nitrous oxide.
Andrea Agonado was stabbed through the back and knocked into his pool, where he consequently drowned.
Jacqueline Wright Charles was bludgeoned and stabbed, slow as Flora Warburton.
Boone Latop was hung from a lighthouse, Tina Berg hit by an RV, and Maddox Rao was shot and dumped in a river.
Suspect Stephen Black and lead FBI investigator Amy Riviera both fled the city,
with Commissioner Ross Mespel and Amy Riviera both later taking their own lives from guilt.
Lead detective Olivia Walnut would also succumb to cancer, leaving the death toll for this series at 9 connected individuals dead, 10 counting Detective Walnut.
These murders spanned only mere months and make the Door County Key Killer one of the most prolific instances in American history.
For a killer to be so clear, kill so many and so fast before disappearing without a trace, never to be caught, they would be put up with the likes of the Zodiac Killer or the West Mesa Bone Collector.
And given time, I suppose this case might one day be solved, or at least join the ranks as one of the greatest unsolved cases in true crime history.
But for that, it has to remain unsolved, and as with every other case, the internet has something to say about it. So let's start with the first theory.
The never caught killer theory.
The theory we've been operating under this whole season.
But who this killer may have been takes many angles.
This brings us to our first fan theories.
As more than anything, we've heard loads of theories on who in the tangential cast may have been a killer.
We boiled that list down to 4 names: Stephen Black, Ross Mespel, victim number 7 Flora Warburton, and Hetty Lynn Spackle.
Other suggested names with less validity included barbs at Carlotta Hayes and suggestions that Phoebe had faked her coma.
So let's start with my last pick, Stephen Black. I think we can easily refute this one because he was gone for Flora's death.
True, but the theory explains this by accusing Winnie of the final murder. They cite the key being used as a weapon and not a calling card as proof that the killer was different.
Which would align with the sentiments made by Dr. Winehouse that the murder seemed different.
Exactly. We know for a fact that Stephen was on the Schloss account, and that the nitrous oxide tank that killed Philip Hayes was found outside his shop. We have clear ties to all the victims and a few direct connections to other victims, like his frantic hotel visit with Tina Berg the night of her death.
We also know from his letter to Tina that he knew more about the case than most.
Or at least than the police did.
This also explains why the FBI have been so keen to find him after his disappearance.
Speaking of, a few armchair detectives and internet sleuths think they have narrowed down the location of Mr. Black, with one having found security footage of a man who looks identical to the missing mystery man in Basel just this year.
Others have traced him to Ho Chi Minh City, Minsk, Johannesburg, and New Orleans.
All this to say, this is all incredibly speculative.
But having seen the footage in question, I think the Basel footage is the most believable by far.
I agree. Not only is the man in the video very similar looking, but the audio matches what we've heard from his voice pretty well.
I also think it's notable to point out that Mr. Black is still wanted by the FBI and Interpol as a person of interest in the case.
Exactly. So if you do have any credible information and you may know where he is, you know who to call. But be warned, he is still marked as possibly armed and possibly dangerous.
On that note, let's move on to Ross Mespel.
Now, Ross has a very similar suspect trajectory to Stephen Black.
They were both named on the Schloss account, they were both tied to the victims, and they both admitted to knowing more than they let on.
Now, where the comparisons split is the theory that Ross intentionally used his role with the police to mislead, obscure, and obstruct the investigation.
Now, I think that that's a crock of crap, and it's a disservice to the memories of Detective Walnut and Agent Riviera, but I can see how that's possible.
Exactly. The theory mainly ties back to the suicide note and his clear guilt.
The story that makes the most sense is Ross trying his damnedest to keep himself clean, and that leading to the murders.
A classic irony situation. In order to return to law and order, he threw it all out the window.
But again, I think this one's really less believable than Stephen.
Really?
Oh, definitely. I think the suicide note was riddled with guilt from inaction, not ill action. He was aware of the crimes and the benefit from them, and he was referring to the Schloss account.
That's a good point. We know from the white-collar crimes investigation into the account that it was likely used for illegal black market trades, with the Door County Federal Secure Storage Deposit working as their drop point.
I mean, we saw with the Primrose investigation that Julia's company was tied to that sort of thing. Julia was only found to be tangentially connected to that illicit behavior, but something I think we didn't bring up is that Boone LaTopp, victim number 4, was explicitly named as someone who abused the Primrose brokerage.
That is true. The FBI investigation did find that Boone had been marketing in black market art and antiquities, and he was buying and selling through Primrose. Most notably, he was the biggest example of market price fraud in that he, on numerous occasions, had large discrepancies between the price he had paid and then sold the art.
This opens doors for tax evasion, tax fraud, and allows for him to return the profits on specific art sales.
Another party named in the FBI investigation, named Juliana Jordanson, had been collecting all of the existing paintings by a relatively unknown painter named Thomas Ridgwick, and with the market monopolized, began to rebrand his works as highly sophisticated and turned massive profits when the glitterati scrambled to buy them.
It's worth noting that the others who displayed the same behavior were arrested and are serving a wide range of punishments, from prison to community service. So Boone, had he not been killed, would likely be in prison now.
All this to say, it's most likely Ross was aware of the conspiracy afoot in Door County and looked the other way for a cut of the cash, and when the operation went belly up, felt guilty for the chaos and pain left in its wake.
I mean, had he put a stop to it, the murders likely never would have happened.
Now, this theory does raise the question of whether or not the DCKK was actually a serial killer, or if they were targeting the co-conspirators of the Schloss account, making them less serial killers and more extended hit people.
And we'll look into that later this episode, but first, let's look into the next possible name, Flora Warburton.
This theory poses that Flora set out to kill off the rest of the co-signatories of the Schloss account, and then was killed in the end by a vengeful Nina.
Basically, the theory argues that Flora remained generally out of the limelight, but disconnected from the various murders, but would have had access to all of the crime scenes due to her business board connections.
She would have reasonably found herself nearby and had the easy alibi of living off on Washington Island. No one would suspect that she traveled between the two islands each night to kill, mainly because you can't.
When in reality, the theory argues that she simply stayed on the peninsula under a false identity and killed before returning to work the next morning.
Exactly. This theory is slightly substantiated by Winnie, who noted that Flora started coming to work later and later in the months leading up to her death, especially citing the days immediately following the first 4 murders.
Meaning that she was late to work the morning after Phil, Andrea, Jacqueline, and Boone's murders.
She was, however, seen the night Tina and Maddox were killed, and of course, being the 7th victim, she would be present at the scene and time of her murder.
So the theory argues that she killed the first 4, but who did the rest?
As noted earlier, they suggest she herself was killed by a vengeful Nina Aganato after learning that Flora had killed her husband, which would align with Nina being the last client to meet with her that day.
But on that note, who killed Maddox and Tina?
Well, Maddox was not an actual signatory of the Schloss account, meaning he likely was the victim of a copycat killer, and who that may have been is something we will cover later this episode.
And Tina, being the only signatory witness, was likely less involved in the crimes and may have been a simple hit by the Smitten sisters and pinned on the DCKK.
As much as we know that her death was very suspicious, there is always that shred of doubt that it was just an accident that landed really weird.
The final name in this section takes the never-caught killer to the next level, theorizing that dental hygienist Hetty Lynn Spackle was in fact a cold and calculating serial killer.
Any listener with an ear for patterns could point out that only one name appeared in every episode without question, and that was us two, but also Hetty Lynn Spackle.
Alex had previously referred to her as the woman with the worst luck, but what if in fact she was the opposite?
What if Hetty Lynn Spackle is the luckiest woman in Door County?
And we know that she had a deep hatred for Feld's adulterous behavior.
And she may have been motivated by Flora's unkind words.
But why kill the others?
This theory from one of our listeners speculates that Hetty Lynn killed with little reason and no intention to target the members of the Schloss account and hit them all randomly.
It argues that she was there every time and was never listed as a suspect due to her community reputation and could have thus easily been overlooked.
Occam's razor says that the easiest answer is more often than not the right answer, and in this case, I can clearly see how the argument can be made that Hetty Lynn was always there, and assuming she is in fact a cold-blooded killer, given the chance to kill these individuals, why would she not?
It also goes so far as to connect Hetty Lynn to a string of unsolved murders in Wisconsin dating back to the 80s.
But is there any validity to this theory?
Oh god, no. But it's fun to speculate.
Exactly.
This theory hinges on so many ifs and buts and ands that pulling at any loose seams unravels the whole thing. But you've got a surprise in store.
Yes, I do. After the break, we'll get a new perspective on this case as I sat down with Miss Hetty Lynn Spackle herself to get her side of the story. Her thoughts and more theories to come after the break. Thank you so much, Miss Spackle, for agreeing to speak with me today.
Of course. Honestly, I find all this kind of amusing.
All right, so I have to ask about, the whole...
The serial killer thing?
Yeah.
Sadly, I am not a serial killer. But you can imagine how I felt at the time. I mean, all these people dying around me. You start to worry that you're one of those people who sleepwalks and leads a double life. But no, I know for a fact I am not a serial killer.
And so how do you feel about the theory, just, generally, that you may be a serial killer?
Well, at first it hurt. But honestly, with time, I started to find it rather funny. I mean, I have a Wikipedia page. I got a book deal. So I'd say it was worth the sting, but, well, not worth the death, though.
Yeah, fair. Finally, I'd love to ask you if you might have any suspects or theories of your own.
Well, I have none. I think that whatever happened, it was a complex scheme. It was pulled off by someone smart enough to leave behind a boatload of red herrings. I honestly think it might be a name that we haven't even heard yet.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Miss Spackle.
Fascinating.
I mean, she was just a blast to sit and chat with, and it's a shame we can't share more of the interview, but, well, time.
Yeah. Hetty Lynn brought up our next major angle in the case, though.
Yes. She mentioned the shadow killer theory, which basically argues that someone unheard of entirely is behind the murders.
The number one theory among those involved, including Agent Gregory Parrish, the poor schmuck who took over after Agent Riviera's sudden disappearance.
The theory isn't too deep, but is, I would argue, one of, if not the most realistic explanation.
Exactly. I mean, the biggest issue in the case is that no one name can fit all 7 murders.
At least none of the names that we've brought up. And the only one that really does is Hetty Lynn, who doesn't fit the bill of a serial killer, nor is she involved with a Schloss account.
The first angle often brought up is that the killer may have been someone victimized by the conspiracy at the heart of the Schloss account, someone who was hurt by the backroom dealings and financial crimes.
Another angle is that someone found out about the crimes and became a vigilante.
This could connect with a few more fringe theories that Andrea was funding the drug trade behind his restaurant.
In her notes, Agent Riviera noted suspicions that the Schloss account could have been tied to all other kinds of crimes.
From black market trade of art and antiquities to tax evasion, racketeering, fraud, money laundering, smuggling, mail and wire fraud, and even drug-related crimes.
If you remember Paul Gene Hatterson's testimony, the drug trade behind the Algonados restaurant was a long-standing institution.
Which may have also been what Ross was covering up. Point is that they were likely committing various crimes and had a frustrated Samaritan may have lost the patience and decided to take it on their own hands to clean up the streets.
This does tie perfectly into another theory.
Oh, I know where you're going.
It's another fringe one, but I think you might find it interesting.
Go right ahead, stage is yours.
Alright, so there's a theory called the dying olive tree theory, great name, that proposes that it was Olivia Walnut who is behind the murders.
Yeah?
I get it. Anyway, it's cuckoo bananas crazy, but at its core, it argues that Detective Walnut uncovered the conspiracy and brought it all to Commissioner Mespel,
Who would obviously shoot it down.
Clear to her that the police was compromised, Olivia would decide to take it into her own hands to take the circuit down.
You're leaving out the best bit. She knew that she was dying, so she did it herself, knowing that she was going to die either way.
You have to admit that if this was true, it would be pretty cool.
Except it so isn't. Well, let's keep this show on the road and move on to another fan theory.
This theory specifically combines names to explain the various murders, mainly Winnie Conrad, Rubina Levy, and Rebecca Marlin. Winnie has a generally clear motive for the first half of the murders, but comparatively none for Boone, Maddox, and Tina.
The theory suggests that Winnie set out to kill members of the business board that destroyed her career. Phil, Andrea, Jacqueline, and Flora were all on the board and thus partially responsible for her losing her company.
But the theory loses a lot of traction with the clear prevalence of the Schloss account in the crimes, which leads to a similar theory that poses that Boone was killed by Rubina for risking her personal and financial safety with his illegal dealings. That Tina caught on and had to be killed to cover it up. Rubina was in the area and had access to a car, plus no one ever checked her whereabouts as she wasn't listed as a suspect.
Those two theories, in combination with a third that suggests that Maddox was killed by Rebecca, form a complete but deeply plausible story. The thought that despite his paternal connection, Maddox was killed independently is a commonly occurring theory and matches with the various theories that theorize that Rebecca, fed up with his treatment of her boyfriend and Dante, brought him home, killed him upstairs before stuffing him in the back of her car to drive Enrico home and dumping him on the way back.
Another similar theory suggests that Rebecca worked with Enrico, and in a third theory suggests she worked with both brothers, to kill Maddox. Either way, it's a generally supported theory that Aganato brothers and Rebecca had something to do with the murder of Maddox Rao.
I mean, it's the clear path and makes more sense than the actual Door County Key killer killing him for his connection to the Schloss account. It would also explain the two murders in one night, with the quote, real Door County Key killer targeting Tina and the others targeting Maddox.
I personally think that the case has to be a lot more complex than a single killer. I believe that a theory, like the one where Winnie is the quote Door County Key killer while Rubina and the Aganato Marlin gang take care of the rest, is a lot more plausible.
Again, until you bring the Schloss account back in.
But one thing this theory does cover is Stephen's disappearance. If he knew the board was being targeted, he would reasonably flee.
But then again, why would he approach Tina with that letter? How was Tina involved with the board?
We'll take a deeper look into Miss Tina Berg and her role as arguably one of the most pivotal players in this case after the break.
Welcome back. Before the break...
Wait. I think that's the last break of the season.
Oh, already?
Right? I think this is the perfect time to give credit where credit is due to the brilliant composer who did our break and theme music, Carlos Ortiz. Shout out to him, he's awesome.
We love him. Anyway, before the break, we started to look into Tina Berg and her very central position in the case.
I think it's a given that Tina was killed to silence her.
I agree.
But why do they need to silence her? What did Tina know?
For one, Tina was a signatory witness on the Schloss account. What that means is unclear, but I think we can assume that she had some sort of role in the account from a legal/financial perspective that wasn't an active member.
This means she would have been aware of who signed and when.
But wasn't Tina also Julia's lawyer?
Exactly. Well, sort of. Tina worked primarily for Julia, that is true, but she also served to work on a great many contracts for Primrose Holding, which was her actual employer. I remind you, she originally worked for Primrose before stepping back and only working for Julia in her retirement.
And with that information, we start to understand the power here. What are the chances that Tina knew everything?
I would argue very high.
It stands to reason that Tina was kept alive because she had leverage, but as that leverage stripped away, she was killed.
Or conversely, she was killed because she took an active role in the scheme.
If she feared for her safety as much as we know Flora and Stephen had, she would reasonably try to use her knowledge to do something about it.
Which leads us to another of my favorite theories. Tina was tipping off the police.
The theory stands to argue that the various original letters to the police, for example the one about Boone, were written by Tina in an attempt to get the killer caught.
Clearly she knew the killer was luring Boone into town with the lighthouse to get him, as he was the only signatory not actively in Door County.
And thus the biggest threat.
Whoever it was must have convinced the Owens to sell the lighthouse, something Tina knew full well Julia was looking for, so they could lure Boone back to Wisconsin with the one thing he wouldn't miss.
Then we question whether or not Julia was involved in that murder, or if she even knew.
Agent Riviera astutely argued that Julia couldn't have known about the plot to kill Boone, as she had made over 40% of her income through her business with him and Rubina. Income that, unlike for Rubina, wouldn't be replaceable.
I think so too. And I think that loops us back to Stephen Black and is confronting her the day of his disappearance and her death.
Stephen confirms that she knew. The question is, did he know who the killer is? And if he did he tip them off on Tina's backhanded dealings, or did they catch wise themselves?
Again, we will likely never know.
And that's probably because most of these people are dead or missing.
So that's the case.
That is the whole story of the Door County Key Killer.
In excruciating detail.
And sadly, it still remains unsolved.
Most involved parties now live quiet, removed lives, while others have embraced their newfound fame. Janine Walsh moved to Tampa, where she still works as a dental hygienist. Paul Gene Hatterson moved to Green Bay and is now in a pre-law program with the hopes of turning his life around and becoming a public defender.
Carlotta Hayes changed her name and went into hiding due to the immense hatred she was sent, but is now slowly returning to the limelight to talk on the experience as a speaker on public shaming and the power of the internet.
Enrico and Rebecca are still dating and have stated that the experience has bonded them together. Dante has publicly spoken about his experience in the interviews but leads a quiet life. He and Benji split when he left for college in New York.
Phoebe Aguinaldo would take over her father's business while Roberta Charles would take over her mother's. They both merged and now co-own Argos Incorporated.
Julia von Hindenburg was diagnosed with early onset dementia and is now living full-time with Nina at a new home in D.C. Harry and Julia did start dating before the diagnosis and plan to continue their relationship while they still have time.
Winnie Conrad now owns her business again, and Virginia Lively still works for
And
her.
Rubina Levy would go on to fund an art museum in London.
A museum fraught with scandal.
But that's for next season.
Ooh. And finally, Teddy Sturgeon and Hetty Lynn Spackle have since married and are enjoying their time in Fountain Hills, Arizona.
Plus, Agent Thomas Tatler
That prick from the diner
would be fired from the FBI and found liable for wrongful death in the Maddox Rao case.
So that's it.
That's it.
I'm gonna miss this.
Well, we'll be back before you know it.
I like the sound of that.
Season 2, here we come.
But not so fast. Let's give it some time to breathe, and I also need a lot of time to research.
Oh yeah, I kind of forgot that you did that.
Okay.
And so, for the last time this season,
Thank you for listening. This has been an episode of Gonsbach Productions Presents Truer Crimes, Locked Door County.
the story, all names, characters, and incidents portrayed in this production are fictitious.
No identification with actual persons, living or deceased, places, buildings, products is intended or should be inferred.
Detective Walnut, I hate seeing you like this. You didn't deserve to go like this. You were a good person, and I came to tell you the truth. You want to know how we did it? You were right about the Schloss account. We were using it for black market trades, but then they saw how it worked and saw what they were getting away with and started to want more. They started branching out from art and got into all kinds of dirty business. And I walked away. I got involved to keep my grandbaby safe and taken care of. But then I realized that no matter what happened, I was in too deep. I had to clean up my mess. And then the FBI came looking at Primrose, so I had to clean faster. I messaged them, all of them, and told them that I needed their keys. To access the drop point, they were given a key fob, a small key fob. They were told to say it belonged to their gym, and it's not important. I needed them back so I could scrub myself from it. I took myself off the records and closed my box at DCFSD. Thing is, they didn't want to stop, so I had to stop them. I knew Phil kept his on his keyring, so I hired this little shit who had tried to rob my place a few years ago to go in and steal it during one of his appointments. He tried, and it went sideways, and he called me to say he had gotten into a fight with Phil and left him knocked out in the office. I knew Harry lived downstairs, and I knew he'd do anything for me, so I asked him to go up and get the keys, but apparently the scene was a lot messier than I thought, and Harry decided to make it look like a murder. We knew we had to confuse you if we wanted to get away with it, so it was his idea to invent the Door County Key Killer and pierce it through Phil, who he killed to throw you off. Now, of course, I paid Paul Gene a lot of money to stay quiet, and the sight of what Harry did told him all he needed to know about what I was capable of. After finding out Phil was dead, Andrea panicked and threatened to expose me, so I did him in. Enrico caught me, but He felt the same way, so we staged the scene and made everything look different. Then Jackie called me over and we talked. She wasn't happy, and when I explained that all I wanted was the key, she pulled a gun on me and told me to leave. So I asked Phoebe to get it. Phoebe, on her own, I have to say, I'm impressed, drugged her, but the bitch fought back and Phoebe had to kill her. She called Harry, who went over to clean it up, and then he knocked her out to remove suspicion. I'm not proud of that part. Boone was the leader. He and Andrea were friends from New York, and he had already been using Primrose to skirt the laws and just transplanted it to Door County for less oversight. He realized I was going after everyone, so he chose to stay away. I knew he had one weakness, so I got him that lighthouse to coax him closer. He got there, and I slipped a suicide note into the contract, so when he signed, I called Harry, who snuck over and strangled him, and dropped the corpse over the ledge. No one threatens me. Speaking of, the little shit-stain who was tormenting my grandson was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Like I said, no one messes with my family, so when I heard what he said, I drugged him and suggested Rebecca and Rico take him home. I dragged him up and shot him. I was angry, and the stress must have gotten to me. I drove out and dropped him in the creek. I normally wouldn't get my hands dirty, but Tina had been doing too much, and I needed Harry to handle her. He found her, hit her, drugged her, and threw her in front of the RV. Flora knew what was happening, so she readily handed the key over earlier, but during her meeting with Nina, she implied that she had planned to come forward in exchange for protection and then book it back to Amsterdam. Just like Stephen. I raised my daughter right, and in all honesty, I think Virginia was just looking for a way to do it and get away with it. So, you understand. I was raised to believe that nothing matters more than blood. It's thicker than water. It's all that matters in the end. Now the only ones I truly stand by are the ones I did myself. The others could have gone differently, but Andrea was power-hungry and stupid and treated my daughter and her babies like pigs. And that boy deserved everything that came to him for what he did to my grandsons. Now, no one can ever know about this. What I did, what we did. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. But it did, and I thought you deserved to know. Well, God bless you for trying. You were a lot closer than you knew, and I thank you for that. You were a good woman, and God is gonna reward you. Only good thing about you dying is that you can't tell a soul what I just said. Not anymore. So, now you know. You can die at peace. I'm not evil, detective. I just want to keep those I love safe. You can't blame me for that. But at least now you know it's over. No one else gets hurt. No one else dies.